Found right down here, so within 2 weeks, they had a crew of university boys going along here looking to see if there was any more. I said, that's the only piece I found, and I found it in about 3 feet of water. But he said it was very similar to some of the stuff that they found down on the Slate Islands.
Huh, wow.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about history.
Well, I came over here on the Isle of Prince when I was 6 days old. And back and forth, I guess up to the age of 3. From the age of 3 on, basically, I was pretty well brought up with my grandfather and grandmother over here. That was back in the days of the dirty 30s. And my mother and dad I was the oldest. And back those days, work was hard to find and that, so I was more or less put under the wing of my grandfather and grandmother. So I grew up here, out here, basically grew up with them all every year. And the kids always had lots to do, berry picking and helping Grandpa with the wood pile and everything, because everything was wood. And going out in the boat. Back in those days, there was no outboard motors. It was everybody was rowing. I think the first, I was talking to George Stinson the other day about it. I says, I can remember the first motor on a boat at Silver Islet was old man I.L. Matthews. And he had the old type rowboat pointed on both ends and double sets of oars. And he got somebody to put a one little cylinder engine in it with a drive shaft through the back. And he put a rudder, he had a rudder on the back of it with 2 ropes, and he used to steer it like this. And it was just like a putt-putt. That's the first motor boat that we had out here, I think. Because everybody rowed. Right. Everybody rowed. There was no motors at all. I think my grandfather had one of the first ones, and it was the same way. The outboard was attached to the back of the boat, and the coil ran off a 9-cell and the battery. You had a battery in the back, but the motor was solid on the boat, and the rudder was built on the back of the motor, and you steered it with 2 ropes. And it was just like the old Model A. When you started it up, it was forward. And if you wanted to go in reverse, you threw the lever real quick, and it reversed the timing. It would back up. And then in the later years, well, my grandfather was president, I think it was 37 and 38. That was, Ern Cross had the first truck out here. And we used to use it to take all the fish from the dock. The fishermen used to bring all their cull fish, the suckers and that into the dock. And Vern here would take them on the truck. And we would go to the fox farm and used to brew them up there for the foxes and the mink. And matter of fact, that was my first job. I worked for Ern when I was about 10 years old, back and forth, doing different things. He taught me how to milk the cows, and we used to get the cows every morning. You let them out in the morning. They all had bells on, and they always ended up down in the cemetery, because there was a trail right along this side of Surprise Lake, all the way down. Part of that trail it turned into the road, but there was a trail right from the barn. And the barn was right down on the shore in the corner there, right below Freeberg's place there. That's where the barn was. And it was here when, I can remember when he caught the sturgeon. Did you ever hear of that or see the picture?
I heard about that. Yeah.
Well, there's that picture. Maybe it's in the library. I was looking for the card because they made postcards of it. Lakehead Motors sent their record. They had the record with the big hook on,
right.
And they had this sturgeon hooked onto it, and it would come right down like that on the pavement. And then they took it into Port Arthur, and they had it in they made a metal tray and filled it with ice, and it was in a showroom window for a couple of days. But there's pictures of that. That was over 100 pounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it. The edge of surprise.
Well,
Picture.
when Ern caught that, he was out fishing for speckled trout because we planted speckled trout in there. We used to minister. We used to get it and pack. We put speckled trout in Grassy Lake, Surprise Lake, and a couple of the other lakes back there, but they never took. And he was fishing for the speckled trout, and he got this thing. And I towed him around the lake 3 or 4 times. And finally he got it to come in to the shallow water there where the barn is. And he had pitchforks lying against the barn. And he let the line out, he ran up and he grabbed the pitchforks, and he got into shallow waters. He put the pitchfork through its head and stood on it. He stood on it until it was drowned.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's how he caught it. And then the other thing, was out back here then, in the community, we had garbage pickup. Ern, at the meeting, he says, okay, he says, I'll go along with it. Everybody had to have their garbage down at the roadside at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And I'd be on the back of the truck, and they had to be there with the garbage. And they'd hand the garbage up to me, I'd put it in the truck, we got it all up, and we'd take it out to the dump. And that's back in 1937, 38, with garbage disposal. Back then. And I still have, up just in the sauna, I think one of the first signs that was made, my grandfather had them made, about cleanliness and keeping Silver Islet clean. That's up in the sauna there, if you wanted to see it after. I think the date sauna is 1938. But there was always something to do out here when Oscar Stiff and the Waco were cutting timber back here, and the tugs would be coming along pulling a great big raft. Everybody along the shore was praying for a storm because back in those days, everybody had wood stove. You used a wood stove winter, summer, it doesn't matter how hot it was, you still had to cook your meal. So all the logs coming in and all the kids, like 3 or 4, give you 10 cents for every nickel or a penny or that for every log you bring in. And as soon as the log hit the shore, all the kids were after that log. Get it up on the sawhorse right away, and you'd look to see if there was a stamp on the end of it, because back in those days, all the different timber companies, the scalers would hit the end and they'd put PS on it, Pulpwood Supply, or NE, Newaygo, H for Hammer Mill. They all had their own marking, and they'd mark so many logs when they were scaling it. So if those logs came up here, you want to cut that end off right away, because the beachcombers would come along. If you got caught with that, they could fine you, because it was stolen pulpwood. Oh yeah, there was always a younger group. We always had a great big bonfire there'd be a bonfire put in every Saturday night or something up on the jail beach. And if it was nice and calm, the guys and some of the gals would row out to Trowbridge. I've seen it many times with them. Nice calm night, they'd row out there. Everybody rowed everywhere. Everybody's in good shape then. And yeah, there was always something to do. And another thing back in the early days was that to keep the animals away from the house, everybody with tin goods, when they finish the tins, and at nighttime, just when the coals are going down in the stove, They always used to put all the tins in the stove, and they'd burn them.
Yeah.
And then the next morning, you take the cold tins, and they bury them up. That's why all over the rocks up here, no matter where you go, you find tins.
Right.
And but they were all burned. And you never had any trouble with any animals. And and then they always had the kids' dances up there, and then later on in the dance hall. And well, I was here, Peter Dennis, Terry Dennis. Well, we buried old man Buck. We helped fill in the grave. I got pictures of that. Yeah, I got pictures of when my grandfather, and there was about, I think it was 16, 18 guys, when they put the first truck to come through here. I think it took them a day and a half, 18 hours or 19 hours. They cut the road and corduroyed it as they went over the swamps. They all come out on a Barton and Fisher truck. They got to the store. And Brenda Cross had a picture of it with everybody on it. And I was up there. Brenda and I exchanged a lot of pictures because I had a picture of the church when they built the church up there with the guys standing on the steeple when they finished it. And the steeple of that church had a walk around it. And they used to call it the Widow's Walk, because if there was a whistle or that at the mine and they knew there was trouble, somebody would go up on the top, and you could see right over Burn Island. You could see the mine from the top of the church. And I had pictures of all that with up there, and the names of a couple of my great-grandfather, and another guy that his son actually married one of my grandfather's sisters. But I had the names of, I give all up to Brenda, and then we sat down and picked the names out. There was quite a few names that came out on the truck. I could just from seeing them. And like my grandfather's brothers that were born in here, I didn't know they were born here, but I had met them, I knew them. The only one, the last one born in here was his sister, Marie, and she only lived to about 2.5. And I think she buried down in the cemetery here. That was in 1880. And that's when that plague went through. There was a lot of children. Some of the families lost 6, 7, 8 children. All kids, youngsters. But every summer, no matter who you were, everybody was berry picking. There was lots of berry picking. You picked raspberries, you picked blueberries, you picked gooseberries, you picked thumbleberries, because everybody was making jam and that for the winter. And altogether different than it is now. And then up on the dock, the boats used to come every weekend. Well, there would be one Friday night, but there's one on Saturday morning. We'd get in here at noon. And excursions. But that's the boat that all the kids would run down to the store. I think every kid in the island would tear down to the store because they used to bring the mail and ice cream. And they had great big, they looked like duffel bags. They were insulated canvas bags, and they put the ice cream things in it, and it would keep it till it got out here. Well, as soon as the boat hit, that's the first thing that came off the boat, and they'd get it up into the store, and Aunt Maggie would be up there dishing cones left, right, and center. And the ice cream was all gone, well, within a couple of hours, because they had no way to keep it, eh? And then the mail delivery, everybody's mail came out on the boat. And Erg and Cross had the fox farms. I used to help him out there in the fox farms and help him with his cows. Learn how to milk a cow there. That's where I learned how to. He showed me how to milk a cow. Back in those days, like they talk about homogenized milk. Well, everybody, Vern would, he'd milk the cows generally around pardon me, in the evening, just after supper. We'd round them up and bring them in, and then you'd milk them. Anybody wanted milk, you had your little jug about maybe a quart, 2 quart. The porcelain, not porcelain, but the old, what do you call it?
Like a stoneware?
Yeah. And you'd carry it to handle and you take it up, you get fresh milk right out of the cow and you bring it home. And like oftentimes we'd take 3 or 4 up. My grandfather would go up with me, and we'd get maybe a gallon of milk. Nobody else was getting it. And they'd bring it down, and she had a great big crockery jug like that, and she'd stir it up to get the butter. You make the butter from the warm milk, eh? And then they kept it in the back room here at the cooler. Yeah, and it would float right up. It was amazing what they did in the old days.
What's the history of the camp?
The camp?
And
Well,
in relation to the mine?
Well, this was one of the the original one right here. The brandy added on. There was just a wooden open brandy here. I got a picture up there. You'll see it after. And actually, it was the miners that named this place Roseville. Oh. It wasn't named after. It was the miners that named it, due to they said it was one of the few spots on the avenue where all the wild roses grew. There were wild roses all over, and they still are coming out of why? Whether it's something in the rock or what, but that's why they named it. And one of the old signs was still above the door, pointed out to Brenda, from the old mine pictures. And that's the original number that's above that door, hand carved above the door, number 15. And they were in this building right up until the mine shut down. And then when the mine shut down, my great-grandfather was a good friend of old Captain Cross. He used to come out here. Anytime he'd come out, he'd let him use the building. And matter of fact, my great-grandfather spent one winter out here with Mr. Cross. And I got a postcard that my mother wrote when she was about 6 years old to her grandfather at Mr. Cross, asking him how he was doing during the winter. And that postcard was found in a ledger, one of the mine ledgers, when Larges were there, Rosemary Large and that. Right. And when she found it, she gave it to me as a keepsake. Oh yeah, and then getting on into a little later years, when war broke out, that's when Sandy Webster and Huey Stevenson and Stinson's, all that generation signed up right away. And I was a little younger. I was a few years younger. When I joined up, I went in at 17. That's how I come in to be in World War II. I was on a troop train on the way down when war ended. Oh. Yeah. So then I signed up for this, what the Canadian government at that time only had 5 divisions, but they formed a 6th division to go and fight the Japanese war because that wasn't over. that was still on.
Right.
And I signed up for it, and because I had all the training. We were on our way to the East Coast, so they brought us back and they put us in Camp Shiloh, and they brought up some American personnel to train us in jungle warfare. Well, that war didn't last very long. But the guys that signed up for the 6th Division were the first guys to get discharged. So that was a plus. Yeah.
Now you were in with
And
you and Mike Nevins.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, Mike came out here. We were very close friends. We were in the Army. We went to school together. Then we were in the Army together. And then after we got out of the Army, the unemployment insurance today is a farce compared to what it was set up for. It was, and my dad was one of the ones that was a founder of the unemployment insurance. He was a personnel selection officer. He was overseas, and his job was picking the guys for commando raids and different things like personnel selection before the invasion. And then when he come back, he was very, very good friends with C.D. Howe. And as a kid, I was in C.D. Howe's house more than back and forth because young Howe, but the junior liberals. But the unemployment insurance was set up so that when the boys come back from overseas, you automatically got, when you're getting discharged, you got your unemployment insurance number. You gave them where you were, or you were to let them know where you were going to be. If they found a job, they phoned you. You took that job. No ifs, ands, or buts. You took that job, but it was a job. If you left it, then you were on your own. But a lot of the guys got the job, they stayed with it, and some of them started in the ground floor and ended up owning the businesses. But that was the way it worked. And well, when Mike and I when I got discharged, the first job came up was down, it was like I got out in late September, the end of September, and the rain season was on. So they gave me a job at Pool 7 on a dump machine, working with a dump machine, dumping grain. And I worked there until December the 15th when navigation is shut off. The marine navigation is shut off for insurance. So I was out of a job, but I was only out of a job for about 5 days or 6 days. And Mike, he was a little later in getting discharged. He hadn't gone to work yet. And my dad was, well, at that time he was manager in employment insurance. And he phoned up, he said, Pulpit Supply, he says, are looking for 2 camp skillers, but they want ex-military men because they were POW camps. So Mike and I left on the train on December the 27th for Long Lake, and we worked in the bush for 4 years. Yeah, down there. We were with Pulpit Supply Company, and then there was Hammer Mill and Nipigon Lake Timber Company, Newaygo. They were all in through there. Kimberly Clark came up and bought them all out to form. They formed what they called the Long Lake Pulp and Paper first, and then it went to Kimberly Clark, because Kimberly Clark had previously owned Kapuskasing. So they owned the whole thing, right from Pritner Nipigon right clean through, except the southern part along the lake, and that was Marathon Paper. Until Terrace Bay they put the mill in. They diverted the watershed. They come all the way from the Kanagamissis. They diverted the Kanagamissis to come into Long Lake. Then Long Lake, they made the diversion down the gorge for the water to flow into the Akasauban for the mill. And yeah, I was there for all that. I just I've got a book there, Pack Paddle and Speckled Trout, and I got it about 15 years ago. But I wrote on the back of it for my boys how you pay for whatever whatever you do to fool around with Mother Nature.
Right.
Like, I can remember going with my dad, a friend of his, and he was the first RCMP constable, native, out of Nipigon, Dan Morrison. We fished the Nipigon River, Virgin Falls and all that before Pine Portage went in there. And it was absolutely unreal. And that was the spawning grounds for speckled trout. And it pretty well put the kibosh on it for a while.
Right.
And then they flooded all that all the way back. And then they found out that they needed more water in Lake Nipigon, so they diverted the Ilki River, the Ugoki, and it flows into northern Lake Nipigon now too. Yeah, all these diverted. When they started doing that, like the Albany River at one time used to be advertised as one of the prized waters to go for speckled trout. Well, Mike and I and a couple of buddies, we decided we were going to go up there. And we drove up to Nakina and got Lunenburg Airways to fly us up to the Albany River. We were up there for 10 days, never saw a speckled trout. We got lots of pike and pickerel. It's changed the whole system. But the funny part of it is, I don't know if you ever remember Fisher, Red Fisher. He was the first one. He was the first one to start that had a TV show on the TV about fishing. And every week, Saturday, he'd put a show on TV. They used to call it From Scuttlebutt Lodge. And he ran it from an island down on the Lake St. Clair. And it just so happened that he had gone up to the Albany River the same year as Mike and I, we went up. And when he got back on his show, he said it was a beautiful trip up to the Albany River. He said, but this story about speckled trout, he says, I don't know. He said, I never saw one, but he says the pike and pickerel fishing were great. And that, they still have films on that wherever they're stored.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, the fishing around here used to be
oh,
fantastic. Eh?
oh yeah. Well, in the early days, the fishing around here, and I can remember it because I used to go with my grandfather, there was no such thing as nobody had a fish rod. Everybody fished with a line, a long line. Matter of fact, they used to buy, most of the fishing lines out here were butcher twine. They used to take the butcher twine, and even like down in Cab Bay, they used a lot of their nets, most of their nets, they used to make their own nets, or butcher twine. And then they used to treat it in what I got to be selling the stuff after. I used to sell it to them down here in 45-gallon barrels. They used to call it tarvaya. It was an oil that come off coal pitch. And get it 45-gallon barrels, and they take their nets and everything else and they'd soak it in that maybe for 3 or 4 days, then take it out in the sun and let it dry. And it stiffened up the nets, but they wouldn't, it was preservative for the water, you know.
Sure.
They wouldn't rot. And all the fishing lines out here were like that. And when you went out, some of them, all the guys were rowing, some of them used to tie it around, the line around their toe. Yeah, oh yeah, some of them used to tie it around their neck. Others would hold, my grandfather used to hold the oar because he said every time he pulled the oar, the hook would make that extra jump in the water.
Right.
But all you had to do was just go in here and go around Powder House Rock and you had 2 or 3 lake trout. It was, lake trout fishing was absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, because I've seen I seen back in those days. I seen like when they'd come out on the boat for the weekend. My dad and a couple of my uncles and that, my grandfather's brother, they'd hold a contest. Roll around, see how many fish you get. Well, maybe 4 or 5 of them roll around. We've ended up with 20 lake trout here. Well, then they put it on ice. Right away, we'd go down to the fishermen. Well, before the fishermen, we'd go up to Ernin, because Ern used to, like, I don't know if you got, but pardon me, in the park, the government decided to take over this park back in 1945. They made a deal with the fishermen. All the fishermen were down at T Harbor.
Right.
And they moved them. There was nothing in Camp Bay, nothing. That's where the Indians, going back, and I can remember this as plain as day. Every summer, the Indians in their canoes would come down and they'd stay overnight in Camp Bay, and then they'd paddle along the shore and they'd wave and everything else, and they would head to Chippewa Park for the summer. And then in late August, they'd head back to Nipigon. And they used to do that every year. Well, then when the government gave Camp Bay to the fishermen, and believe it or not, too bad that Neil Isla and them were still living, but they moved the shacks from T Harbor up here on the ice. I wonder, they moved everything up on the ice. And that's when the government decided that they made a deal with them. They said, we'll move you. We'll put that back road in and keep it open for you winter and summer, because they were shipping fish all winter long then. Like, they were fishing through the ice and everything. Sure. And Humby, C. Humby, had the fishery in Port Arthur. And he used to pick all the fish up, and he used to sell them to Kemp Fisheries in Duluth, and they transferred them back and forth. That's the way it worked. And
so the reason they moved was not because of weather?
no, it was not because of the park. It was, they had to ride in that park. They wanted that park. They wanted, eventually, they figured they were going to get it. And like, you wouldn't be surprised, or you'd be shocked if you saw the original. I got it somewhere, the original plan of the park. And I can remember Colonel Bliss, because he was the head one of it at that time. And he came into the association, and that we had a meeting with it. You don't have to worry about the park. It won't disturb you people at all, he says, because it's going to be a wilderness park. And he says, that's just for people to come in, he says, and set their tent and do hiking and that. But he says, there's going to be nothing. We're going to call it a wilderness park. I said, yeah, until the next election. And, well, you can see what it is today. But then how it grew was across the state. And every year, Jules would let a piece go for taxes. And this is how it grew. It grew for on the taxes. And another piece, a piece of property that maybe would be interesting, you don't know about, is down in Camp Bay, or not Camp Bay, but Middlebrunt Bay, right in this cove, as you come into Middlebrunt Bay, in this little cove in there where the trail used to end, where the road used to go through. That's where the scaler shack was. That's trouble now. With this, since I got banged up by every now and then, I go to say a word, and the timber company that was in there, not Newaygo, Stiff, Oscar Stiff.
Oh, okay.
He had it was a real nice scaler shack, real good. I'll tell you about it in a minute. You'll know the size of it. because it was winter and summer. Because in the wintertime, they used to pull all the pulp down. And they had a great big boom across Middle Brunt, and they used to load Middle Brunt with pulpwood on the ice. And the scaler shack, they were there all winter. So when I knew they were closing down, I went to see Oscar, and I said, how about that shack down there? Because I was thinking of putting up a bunkie then. And Mike went with me, because we'd looked it over, and we knew we could take it down the way they were built. You could take it down in sections. Be nothing to move in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. And we used to come out here in the wintertime. Oh, no. He says, I don't know what's going to happen to it. He says, but the deal is, he says, that everything we don't take when we're finished, he says, automatically belongs to the Cross Estate. That's the deal that Jewel had made with him. So I went up to see Jewel. Jewel says, no way. He says, I'm not selling that. He says, you can't have it. He says, I want it. He didn't say what he wanted it for, but he said, I want it. Well, 2 years after, I knew what he wanted it for. You know that place between Patton, Cahill's, between Pattons?
Yep.
That's the scaler shack, just the way it was. He built that for Mrs. Thompson.
Right.
And Mrs. Thompson was Cahill's mother. That's that place, that's the scaler shack that used to be in Middle Brunt Bay. The exact size it has, they had, the only thing they added on, I think, was that little biffy or something on the back, you see it. But that's the scaler shack, the exact size of it and everything else, it never changed. And he did exactly what we did. He just took the 4 walls down on the floor, moved it in here, reassembled it. Oh, yeah.
He was crafty.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And then, like, as I say, I was surprised when I started digging the history, but I'm going to get it, Patty to type it all out and put it in a frame. We got the whole history of the family in this during the mining days. You know, like when the mining company, Lake Coast Trading Company, and Lake Nipigon, when they decided to, after they had Phillips and Benner survey the whole woods location here into lots, and they were going to sell off the property. My grandfather was first in line because he wanted to buy the place he was born in. And that sounds like the helicopter.
Yeah, it does.
So he was in line, and my grandmother wrote it right down. 10 o'clock in the morning on November the 10th, 1910. He bought this place. 3 10s. 10 o'clock in the morning, November the 10th, 1910. That's when they put the property up for sale. And they said there was a half a dozen people lined up some of the old timers. But then it went on the market in Fort William, and they started coming out here, and this became quite a tourist resort in the 20s. Because I got a couple of the old brochures that they used to. It's quite fantastic.
Yeah. How have you, seen the changes and what's your reaction to those changes that have happened?
Well, it's a complete different society today, completely different. Because, and my dad hit it right on the head. He says, if they could do away with waste, nobody would have to pay taxes. And you never saw a piece of board, even if it was that long. You never saw that anywhere, because if it was dropped, somebody didn't want it, somebody else would pick it up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Everything, no matter what it was, and everybody shared. Everybody was shared. And another thing was that up until 1945, 46, when the park went in. I don't think there was one camp or one building at Silver Islet had a padlock on. They're always left open. And there was a sign on the table. And it's strictly the sign was for mostly the fishermen. If they're coming in here, they get stranded. And the sign would be on the table. Make yourself at home, kindly leave the place the way you found it. And there was never any problem at all. No, and then after that road got a little better and people start moving in, and that's when things started to change, and it really changed. And then, like, I can remember on the dock, they didn't do anything for the dock. The great big warehouse over the dock, that was beautiful. You go down there and the kids and everything would come off the boat, go into the warehouse. But one thing that disappeared when they took that great big warehouse off the dock, that place, every night you could go down there with the swallows. The place, all kinds of barn swallows in there. They'd get up underneath that great big overhang there. When that came down, the swallows disappeared. Right. And then they had at this end of the dock where Jim Cosley used to put his boat there. Right. They had there used to be a covered walkway right through. You could walk over that piece of water onto the shore, and it was completely covered. It was like a garage above the water. You could walk right through it. I got all those pictures. All the different boats that come in, the Islet Prince, the Forest City. Right, the boat up there and tugs. Back in those days, my grandfather knew you. I think he knew every tug captain there was. Everything, if they wanted to go to town tomorrow, they'd just go down and watch for the first tug and they'd be in town. Because they were back and forth all the time. Right. And all kinds of them. And they even had a little breakwater or slip where they could repair the tugs there. I don't know if you ever saw pictures of that. But, you know, the breakwater that comes this way and then it comes down, well, there used to be another cribbing in there. Part of the cribbing is still in there because they just clammed the top off. Right. And you could run a tug in there and then they'd lift it right up.
Well, the propeller in front of my place came from that.
Yep. Yeah. But that's where they used to repair them, right in there. And then they had between, well, it would be just a little bit to this side of the generator shack, the Saxburgs there. There used to be another breakwater in there, not a breakwater, but a cribbing, one right out. And you can see that, well, when low water, you could see it because they just clammed the top of it off, and it's still down there.
Sure.
Yeah.
What would you like to see happen here? You know, from the store, the dock, just generally.
Well, there's not much I can say I'd like to see because I'll put it in this words, in the words of Jamie Crooks, when, and this goes back about, time flies by, I'd say maybe 20 years ago. And I can remember as plain as day because this place never got much publicity. It was nice and quiet. Mm-hmm. It was basically close to the way it used to be in the old days, but a little bit more modern. And I happened to be traveling at that time. And I was in Ottawa. And it was, I don't know, I was down there for Thanksgiving or what it was anyway. But I picked up the Ottawa Tribune. And right on the I think it was the second section, they had a picture right across the page, about that long, and about like that, of Gitchigumi. And the caption under that, the paper's still around here somewhere, was, you ought to go to Silver Islet where you can read the newspaper at 11 o'clock at night. I guess Jimmy Cooks, somebody must have told him, or he got wind of it. He says, Frank, he says, that's the end of our quiet little hamlet. That's exactly the words he used. He says, that's the end of our quiet little hamlet. And then the tourists started coming in.
Right.
And then not only that, but it was the park expansion. And
Oh, sure.
the park expansion was the stuff that brought it in. Yeah. Once they started advertising, really advertising that park, well then, it brought everybody in. And it's going to explode. I'd say, I may not be around for it, but I'd say it may take them 10 to 15 years. But this place is going to be a real tourist resort. Because it's been designated as the jump-off place for all tourism for the North Shore of Lake Superior.
Right.
This place and Rossport.
Right.
And as the guy from Parks Canada, I was talking to him, and he says, it might take us 10 years, he says, but on the outside, he says, 15. He said, because we don't want to disrupt the communities, we want to keep them in harmony. And I knew what he was getting at, because he hit it right on the head. He said, we don't want the same thing to happen here as what happened at Banff National Park. Well, we used to travel out there at that time, and they had a real, when the Banff National Park was there for quite a while, but then all of a sudden they decided they were going to start changing a few things around in the old community out with there with the older people and that. Boy, there was a real uproar. So they found out quick.
Yeah.
They found out quick. And he said, we don't want the same thing to happen.
Sure.
He says, we want the harmony here and the harmony in Rossport. But he says, our three stumbling blocks, he said, we got 3 First Stations to deal with. He says, once they're finalized, he said, it'll go through it. And he says, if they finalize quick, he said, it'll go through a lot quicker. And he said, we're not worried about the money. He said, we got the money. He said, we got $35 million. He says, sitting on the bank, we can draw any time. He said, if a project is approved and it's cleared, he says, we could do it right away. That money's been set aside since 1993. And back in 1993, I knew something was going on. I didn't know actually what it was. But back in 1971, I think it was, that's when they first came out and said, the government told everybody out here, valuation day. They wanted everybody to have their property valuated and have it registered somewhere. Just forget about it. And everyone, nobody had, well, right after that, when that happened, in 1971, the reason behind that was the Board of Education. The Board of Education. Up until that time, the Board of Education, whenever they wanted money, they'd all trot down to Queen's Park and fight for money. So the government, in their shady way of doing it, said, okay, you want more money up here? You tell us what townships you want, and you can send your assessors out and take them and put them on the tax roll. And that's what they did. And some people, well, a few people got nipped. Silver Islet got nipped. Shabano and that. Bill Brayshaw died fighting it. And I never actually knew what was going on until the taxes started climbing up, and I appealed it. And I went to the appeal court. And I won. But I said, after the session was over, I said, I want to see the judge. I said, that's handling this. So I went in after, I had a private meeting with him. And I asked him, what's the score on this? Because I said, why I'm asking, I said, I got a couple of brothers, and I said, I know they got cottages up the Spruce River Road. I said, they're not paying taxes. I know out in West Hawk Lake, I said, people out there on one end of the lake are paying taxes, and people not on the other end of the lake. So then he explained it to me. And that's what the government did. They did that purposely so they wouldn't have the boards running down to Toronto every year. Each board, all they had to do was sit down, and they wanted more money, they'd take it in another township. And when it really came to a head was, I guess it's maybe, time flies by so fast, maybe 8 years ago.
Right.
The North Shore bunch took in the township of the lake at Nipigon, north of Nipigon, up Orient Bay Way. And the boundary line went right through the middle of the lake. The people that had to get to their cottages by boat had to pay taxes. The ones that on the other end of the lake that could drive to it didn't have to pay taxes. And then on top of that, the fly-in camps,
Right.
only tent camps, fly-in camps, were nailed. Well, that's how crazy it was, because they were in that township. Even though they were just a frame and you put a tent over it,
Right.
they were getting nailed for education tax. Because I was at the meeting when the Ontario Outfitters Association got behind it and fought it to get it changed. So that's when they said, they came up here and they had a meeting up at the Victoria Inn, and Clarkson, myself, and Siegfried, we were the three delegates to go up and see them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on Hansard. And we just told them what was out here.
Right.
I told him I was sleeping on the same bed. I said, my grandfather slept in 1872. I said, we don't have a telephone. You can't use a cell phone. There's nothing out here. No hydro. They were charging us. If you looked at really your old assessments, yeah, they even had us down for, they were taxing us exactly the same as Pass Lake. If they wanted lights, if they wanted to, and they were thinking of building an old age home. They were taking my money off to build an old age home in Pass Lake. Well, yeah, you wouldn't believe it. And so then that's when taxes start coming back down again. That's when it starts to come down after our meeting. But they come up in front of it. They've never been up here before.
Yeah.
And it's the same, they brought up the garbage dump. Like they wanted to get rid of that. They wanted to put dumpsters in and haul the garbage to Thunder Bay.
Right.
And I know the park was dead against it because that comes out of the park's budget.
Sure.
And I challenged him. I said to the guys, I said, look, I said, you want to come out to Silver Islet? I said, I'll take you for a hike through the bush. And I said, when we get back through, I says, you tell me how many garbage dumps you walked over. And I says, I'll show you where they were after. And then I pointed, and I said another thing. I said, you know where the last and biggest garbage dump we had? I said, you know that great big parking lot, I says, that the park's got that goes into all the different trails? I says, that used to be a garbage dump. Well, they just shook their heads and things camped right down right away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true.
Oh, yeah. But things have sure changed. But I would say in 10 or 15 years from now, this is going to be a real tourist hub. A real tourist hub.
Mm-hmm. Particularly if it gets warmer and warmer down south.
Well, if border regulations ease up a little bit, you're going to see an awful lot of people from Isle Royale coming over. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen Isle Royale spent over $20 million there last year. Do you know that?
Yeah.
And then they got another $10 million that they're going to pour in there, doing away with all the generating.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're really up on this.
Oh, yes. I try to keep up on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were over there. They're changing over to solar, but they also, because of this sequestration, um, they lost 16 permanent jobs there.
It is.
Yeah. There's no ranger at Amygdaloid or at Malone Bay anymore.
There isn't.
Nope.
How are they going to control that? By satellite, most likely. That's right.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because that's one of the things that back is they were letting all the wardens go here. Well, I knew quite a few of them in the head office. I said, how in the hell? I said, you're going to keep track? I says, without the wardens. He says, very simple. He said, we got a lot of people out there. He says, generally, he said, all you have to do is watch the traffic. And he said, we know who's fishing and where they're fishing and where they're going. And he said, if we feel that this guy is not honest, he said, we just put the satellite. He said, we can tell when he's having coffee and a sandwich in his boat. We just watch him. He said, we can see when he says he's cleaning fish and hiding them under the seat. He says, we just sit back. He said, we phone one of the wardens that's in the office and tell them to take the car and go to such and wait for that guy to come in. Mm-hmm. Or they set up a roadblock on the highway if there's a great big bunch of them out there. Sure. That's how they're getting them. They can watch them right from the office.
Oh, that's amazing. Now, you mentioned your grandfather in the late 1800s.
Yeah, right up to the mine closed 1881. When the mine closed in 81, I think it was 81, my grandfather moved to Prince Arthur's Landing. And then he went down to Cloquet for a couple of years, and then he came back and started a grocery store. Like my great-grandfather, from what the history I've dug up so far, I think was one of Frew's men that followed him up. Oh. Because he was, they were married in 1860. And his first daughter was born in 1866. And I knew her son, she died in a fire. Her son told me that his mother was born somewhere in the between Duluth and Thunder Bay, somewhere in that area in the mining. And that's where Frew was before he came into the Silver Islet. So I figure he's one of Frew's men because they say in the book that he had a group that once he came here, there was quite a few that moved and came right with him. Right. And then my grandfather was the firstborn here. He was born in 1872. But he was here with Frew in 68. So he must have followed him right here and then brought the family up as soon as they had the building. Because there was one other daughter that was born in the Thunder Bay district too, Prince Arthur's Landing or around that. Then the other two boys and the other daughter were born in the building here. So there's 4 children born here.
Okay.
But I got all the dates. I got all the dates of the. I knew them because I'd met them. Albert, he died he was one of the first ones to die when the Sisters of St. Joseph's built the Heritage up there. They had a wing, when they bought the Wiley home that went up for tax sale. It was a beautiful home. He was a well-to-do man. I think he was a millionaire. And he had a great big, we call it the garage, or carriage house. at the back.
Right.
Stored winter ones, the sleighs and everything. Must have been about 60 feet long. And it'd be about 40 feet wide, maybe 35 feet wide. But when the sisters bought it, they cleaned it all out and put a floor in it, fixed it all up. And they used to take care of all the old lumberjacks that were coming in crippled up in there. And my grandfather's brother was one. And he was one of the first ones to die in there. I got the write-up on that, where he buried right from. And then in later years, they tore that right down and built the great big apartment. But and the other brother, Pete, he was down here. He visited my grandfather a couple of times. That's where I met him. But he went with the railroad, and he ended up in Whitehorse, Yukon. And he raised his family out there, and he died out there. And he named his first boy after his brother, Harry. And when my mom and dad took a trip out just before my mother passed away, she stopped into Abbotsford. She wanted to see her cousin, or her nephew, Harry. And she saw him. And when I was traveling out there 2 years later, that was just after my mother died, I had the phone number, so I phoned up, and the woman answered, and I said, "Is this the Chaussee resident?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Could I speak to Harry?" She, "Who's speaking?" So I told her. "Oh," she said, "I'm sorry." She says, "Harry passed away." She says, "He passed away just about a year after your mother was here." But I tracked them all down. Very interesting doing that work.
Yeah.
We tracked, my brother and I got together doing it before he passed away. But we tracked my mother's ancestry right back to 1601 in France. And when the Chaussee family first came to Canada, they landed down in Quebec, just a little north of Montreal on the river, way back in the late 1600s. They all grew up down there, and that's how I was able to get my great-grandfather, his birth records and everything. And as they say, all the rest of the kids out here that were born here, I don't know if you know this, but like the Jesuits were the ones that were in the church out here. It was a mission church. And they were the missionaries that were in the first forts in Fort William. Okay. And they kept immaculate records of every birth and baptismal. And when the church closed here, Church of Rose and Luma, they moved the records to St. Andrew's Church in Port Arthur because it was a Jesuit. It was the first Jesuit church in the Lakehead in Port Arthur, Fort William. But when back about, I think 12, 13 years ago, the Jesuits turned that priest over to the diocesanes. But they took all the records and moved them over to the only existing church, which was the original St. Anne's Church on the Mission Island. Oh. So I went over there, and I got a copy of my grandfather's baptismal certificate, his brothers, his sisters, and the old father. He's only one priest over there. He's got a couple. They said they're sending up a couple of younger ones just to go through all the history. They're trying to give. He told me they got the history right back to 1848 when they were in the mission, in the forts. They got the oldest records here. It's amazing the records they kept.
I'll say. Oh, that's amazing.
Yep. Wow. And people don't realize that stuff goes back that far.
Right. One thing about Camp 8, I had interviewed, I think the Philpott brothers, you know, because they had
Yeah.
their 100th, and they were saying that initially the people in Camp Bay and the people in the rest of Silver Islet were quite apart. That there's
You want to,
always
well,
this-
why you brought that up? As you know, Mike and I were very close. He was one of my best friends. Well, we did everything together. Well, Mike's, how we grew up together was Mike's uncle. He had a couple of uncles that were commercial fishermen. One on Sweet Island, and the other one was on Johnson's Landing. And we knew them, and like, they'd come in here to drop the fish off at the dock, eh?
Right.
Well, Mike, a little toddler. So oftentimes they'd leave him here, or if they were going to town, his parents were taking the tug into town with groceries and supplies. Mike would stay here. So we kind of grew up together that way. Well, then his uncle, that was in at Johnson's Landing, he bought a little piece in Camp Bay because he figured that he could do his fall and spring fishing here better than he could out of Black Bay because it's frozen up. And he built a little shack there, and he built an ice dock. So Mike, we went over and talked to him, asked him if we could use this dock in the summertime. He said, sure. And we said, okay. Well, he was building a shack then. I says, we'll put the roof on.
Yeah.
So Mike and I got the shingles, and we shingled the whole roof and everything else. And Mike said to him, he said, now Hector, he says, you ever want to get rid of this place? He says, I want to buy it. Hector says, don't worry about it. He says, most likely, he said, I'll give it to you. Well, that was fine. Until about 8 years later, we come out, and we went to tie up at the dock, and this woman come out. She says, that's private property. Mike says, it belongs to my uncle. She says, oh no. She says, we bought it from him. Well, Mike was furious. So right away, the two of us jumped in the car. We were driving to Johnson's Landing to see Hector. Mike, he says, I'm sorry, I didn't have a thing to do with it. He says, my wife made the deal. They sold it to Reverend Hinckley.
Yeah,
Hinckley? His wife belonged to that church, and she said that her husband was going to move out of Camp Bay. She made the deal with him. He apologized and everything else. He said, I had nothing to do with it. He said, being a reverend, I couldn't back away from it. So that's how come. But that camp was originally built by Hector Gooley, if you want the name, Hector Gooley. Hector Gooley, and he had the fishing out of Johnson's Landing. But now, getting back to what you said, that was an isolated community. And when they moved the fishermen up there, through our relationship with Mike's uncles and that, and the other fishermen, we got to know all the fishermen. Westerback, Neil Isle, Neil and his wife used to come up here. Neil, if he caught a sturgeon, he'd smoke it down there, and we'd bring it up here. It'd be Shorty Strawn, Doherty Strawn. We'd all come up here and have a feed. We were really well with the community down there. And I was president in 1951 or 52, 52 I think it was. And we were sitting here. Just a second. He wants me for something. That's just my son-in-law. The water. But anyway, we're sitting here one night, and we were talking. And I think Neil Isle and his wife were up here and that, and Eli, I says, you think you'd join the Campers Association? He says, I don't think they have me. Well, he says, we'd more than love to have you. He's sitting there and he says, well, what about the rest? I says, tomorrow Mike and I will go down and canvass everybody. We went down, canvassed, we got every fisherman that was in there signed up, the Campers Association, and that's how Camp Bay started coming. Other than up until that time, they were completely isolated. And Mike and I got them all, and it was all through Mike's relationship and myself with, because we knew them all at that time. Oscar and Bertha, and Neil and his wife, Westerback, got them all signed up. And that's how they became top. Signed them all up. And they became part of Silver Islet, and they were sure glad of it. Because they thought they were going to be in limbo. Because it was like that for, well, it's been like that for 5 years. But boy, oh boy, it sure made an awful difference. And they come to the meetings too. They put their input into it, and yeah. Jack Lampshire, they all signed up. Yeah. I think Jack was the first one in there. Because his dad used to run the lighthouse at Thunder Cape.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then, as I say, where I was vacant from here a while was, well, when I joined the Army, and when I got out, my dad approached me. We had a camp at Loon Lake, West Loon Lake. It was actually his dad. He built it after the First World War. We used to camp there. But East Loon Lake, there was nothing. The whole end of the Loon Lake, a great big beautiful sandbar, lovely sandbar, with birches and everything else. And he looked it over, I guess, previously. I wasn't aware of it. He said, how would you like to go in with me? He says, and we'll buy the whole end of East Loon Lake with our Army gratuities and that, and we'll work it out, and we'll build a resort, Morrison's East Loon Resort. I said, fine. So in October, I got the pictures there. They did the Ramsey, young Don Ramsey did the history of, I got the book there if you want to read it. It's very interesting. We went down in October, checked over the whole thing, and the property was split. A good chunk of it was owned by J.R. Duncan, and the other was owned by Dr. Bryan. So we approached them and bought the whole 1,585 feet, I think it was 86 feet of shoreline, which comprised 88 acres. It went right back. It took in where the Amethyst mine is. Oh. Yeah, it went right back. It took all that in, 88 acres. And that's when I went to work in the bush to pay for it. For 4 years, I went to it. There was three. Well, my dad, my mother, myself. And then my grandmother, in 1947, she passed away in the fall of 47. And we had the resort pretty well built. And this place sat empty in 48, 49, and 50. But my dad had come out when I was in the bush. They'd come out and taken a lot of stuff out here because this place used to be stocked like a hotel. There was enough dishes to outfit 6 cabins and still leave all the dishes here because they never knew when they were getting a crowd in here. And my dad he wanted to sell it, and I could see it was really disturbing my mother. And I liked it out here because I hadn't been that much in Loon. The idea was I was going to end up running Loon Lake. Well, Tom, I'll tell you, you don't have to be a Philadelphia lawyer to figure out when something's going to work and something's not. I had 8 siblings under me. I'm the oldest. And they were all grown up. And sure, we had cabins, but they wanted to come down and spend the summer where they're spending it. And that I could see it wasn't going to work at all. And my grandfather, well, he left it to my grandmother, but in the will it was left to my mother and the 9 children. So I approached her. I said, Mom, I said, you give me your share, it says, of Silver Islet and help me to get the rest of them, because I knew the rest of the kids had no use out here at all. They didn't like it. I said, I'll just turn over my complete interest to you, and I said, that gives you controlling interest on Loon. Well, I'll tell you, you never seen a person so happy in her life. I think it was the nicest thing I ever did, because 2 years after she took sick, she took cancer. But she was glad that I was taking this to keep it. And she came out here right till up the day she died to see the improvements all the time. And I got, at that time, that was in 1950. I got a picture one. Just before Marilyn and I were married, we're about to come out here. Because this property was all signed over into my name, and then as soon as we got married, I had it put in joint. Had the lawyers change it. But up until that time, when it was first transferred, and it took a year or two, I think I had one brother and 2 of my sisters could sign legally. Then I had to wait, and one would sign off the next year, another year. I had to wait 12 years for the final deed on account of my youngest sister. Yeah, Lorraine. Yeah, 12 years to get, then I got all clear. And added on, and gradually, right up until 1993. And this is what I was going back to 93. In 1993, the government came out again with a valuation day. And that's when all the publicity come out where you won't be able to turn your cottage over to your children because they'll never be able to pay the tax on it, on capital gains and all this. And they published books, as a matter of fact. And I had one book. Matter of fact, I just gave it to my sister-in-law because my brother died up in. He's got a great big camp up near Atikokan, and 40 different ways of how you can handle it. And I went through all 40 ways, and I wasn't happy at all. And I got to thinking. So I approached the lawyer in 93, and I said, if we don't turn it over now, the kids will never get to pay their taxes on it. I said, this is what I'm going to propose. I suppose Marilyn and I sell it to the kids. We'll have it. I got Max Greer to come out, evaluate the whole thing, and then the repairs, that capital maintenance that come off between 1971 on valuation day and 93. Capital expenditures come off. What the price was established in '93. You see, bring on the tax, and I got to then pay the taxes on it. Then and turn it over to the kids. So that's what I did. But turning it over to the kids, we sold it to the kids. I says, we'll turn it over to the kids for $10. And we'll take back the total mortgage with no interest. But on our death, it dies. The kids have got it. Well, I don't think the government will go with that. I said, well, you should leave it with me. He come back 2 weeks later, he says, they went for it. Oh. So that's what we did. Mm-hmm. And they plugged that loophole up the very next year. Oh. And so in 2010, in 2010, Marilyn was out here. She was really bad then. And we were sitting here one night, and it was in June. And she says, "Do you think it's possible to get that, while I'm living," she said, "get that mortgage discharged now?" She says, "I'll know you won't have any worries. It'll belong to the kids." So I got a hold of the lawyers, and they said they'll look after it. And my niece is a lawyer. She got a hold of the lawyers that had done the groundwork. And she says, "Don't worry, Andy won't even have to come to town." She says, "I'll arrange everything and act as the intermediary." She says, "I'll bring all the papers out here." So we sat at that table on July the 31st, 2010. Mortgage was completely discharged, and it turned over to the 5 kids. She was as happy as if she died in March. And it's all the kids now. So I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
With 5 of them, it'll take a fleet of Philadelphia lawyers if they ever wanted to sell it. Because I don't think you'll ever get 2 of them to agree to it. They all want it.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I think Gord Stinson did the same thing. I know he did because he told me the other day. He said, kind of a happy day in his moment. He says that the kids are all agreeable. He says it's nice to see that it's going to stay in Silver Islet.
Right.
So that's the end of the story. Unless you got any other questions, you name them.
Well, I sure appreciate this.
And I got, if you ever wanted to see any of the pictures, I got a lot of the old pictures. And I got a plate hanging on the wall in there that my grandfather had in 1920 that he gave out as a Christmas gift to the year he retired. He retired in 1920. Oh. And when he went into the grocery business in Prince Arthur's Landing, he catered, he knew them all, he catered to the ships as they came in, and he built up quite a rapport. But he was smart, he built up a building with the grocery store down below. And he had 8 rooms up above. So when they came in with the boats, the sailors could go upstairs. He rented the rooms upstairs. And like everything had to come in the wintertime, or in the spring and the fall. And behind his house in Algoma Street, he had 2 great big humongous warehouses. And they used to store all the dry goods in there. Right. And the captain of the Campana, that was the first steam steel sailor. It had steam and sail, and it was steel. It was built over in Glasgow on the Great Lakes. And the cook in that was a good friend of my grandfather's. And out of a 4-foot stick of pulpwood, he carved a replica of the campana. And he put it in a showcase with beautifully done with the waves and everything else. And he always had it in his store. It was in the store window. And then when he retired, he brought it up, and he had a den in his house. He had a big house. And I always admired it because when he carved it out, he'd carved out the windows in 3 or 4 places, set it up, the lights, you could put a little battery in it, it would light up at nighttime. And the boat looked like it was at nighttime, eh? And I always admired it, so I guess he told my grandmother when he passed on I was to get it. So when he passed on, she says, "That's yours." So it came out of the den, and I had it above my fireplace in town, and I got transferred east. I didn't let the movers move it. When I came up one summer and I was going back by myself, I took it back in the car, and I had it down east over the fireplace. I had it out, I didn't put it out here. And then it was the year before my mom passed away, I got a phone call. And he says, "Francis, how would you like to do something for your mother?" I said, "What? Name it." He says, "You know that boat her dad had?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "How would you like to give it to her?" They were just starting up the Thunder Bay Historical Society. And friends of them, Keith Dennis was the first president. And they knew them very well. "Give it to your mother and let her present it in memory of her dad." I said, "Sure," but I said, "You have to wait till next summer to get it." I said, "When I bring it up in the car, I'm not going to ship it. It's too delicate." Pardon me. So I brought it up, and her picture was taken in the paper and everything else. And she gave it to them. But just prior to that, once I had the boat, and I had it, as I say, in my home in Thunder Bay, Port Arthur, I got a phone call from McGillivray, he owned Times Journal. And he phoned me up and he said, "Frank," he said, "here you got the campana, that boat." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You can come over to the Times Journal." He said, I'd like to see you." So I walked in his office, and he says, "I hear your grandfather left it to you." And I said, "Yep." He said, "I'll give you $200 for it." I said, "It's not for sale." "Well, name your price." I said, "You hear what I said?" He said, "It's not for sale." So then I said, "Well, why do you want it?" He says, "That's the boat that brought all the McGillivray cattle up to Port Arthur." He says, "It moved the McGillivray family," he says, "to Fort William." He says, "That's why we wanted it." I said, "Well, it's not for sale." I said, it's personal keepsake." So things died there. And my mother presented it to the museum, and I was there, and it was agreed that the museum would make the plaque on it where it was built and who carved it. And it was donated by my mother, Mrs. M.K. Morrison, in memory of her dad, Harry Shosey, a prominent grocer. So after it was done, I never thought another word of it. One day I'm sitting out here, about 10, 12 years later. I said, "Geez, I wonder what happened to that boat." So I was going in for groceries. I dropped Marilyn off for the groceries. I thought museum. I walked in the museum, and I walked around it. And it's sitting up on the top shelf, all by itself, nothing on it. So I went over to the girl, and I said, "Is the curator here?" And she said, "Yeah." So he come out, and I said, "Well, what's the score?" I says, "Where's the plaque and everything?" "Well," he says, "to tell you the truth," he says, "we got all kinds of stuff in here like that right now." He said, "We're waiting until we get moved into, we're going to get another building." That's the building they're in now. And he said, "Once everything is in that building," he says, "it'll be properly done." So I came back here, and geez, after 16 years, I think they'd have the plaque anyway. Dave Cheadle was walking down the avenue. And we used to walk in the evening. He said, Dave, I said, if they don't live up to their word, I said, what's my legal right? And he said, you can take it back. So I never paid any more attention to it. Until when the wife passed away, and I moved right back here. And I'm sitting in the apartment last winter, thinking, all of a sudden, I thought, geez, that Campana. I wonder where it is. They're in the new thing. So I phoned up the museum to find out what the hours were. And I went over, and a girl was there, and I said, I'd like to see that Campana. She said, well, I don't know where anything in this building. She said, there's 3 floors. I said, well, I got lots of time. So I walked to the first floor, it's not there. Walked to the second floor, it's not there. Got up to the 3rd floor, and they have it mounted on the wall. It was nice, it was kind of on a dresser, and had a plaque underneath it. This boat sat in a store window in Port Arthur, and it was given to us by Mr. Brown. Well, it didn't take me long to go down 3 flights of stairs. I said, where's the curator? And Torrey came out. I'd never met him before. And I said, that Campana, he says, that's all wrong. I said, you better take, so I went over the whole thing. Well, right from the day my mother gave it to me, and I said, if I have to go through the newspaper, I said, I got the picture to prove it, she gave it. And I says, furthermore, I says, I've already discussed this with a lawyer. He doesn't live in Port Arthur or Fort William anymore, but I know where he lives and he's still living. And he told me I have my legal rights to take it back unless it's done right. Wait, just leave it with me, Mr. Moore. Just leave it with me. He says, give me 10 days, give me 10 days to 2 weeks. He said, I'll get back to you. So I guess he went back and started digging through the old files, and he found the file because he phoned me up about 10 days later, and he says, how does this sound? And he read it off exactly the way it was posted, but he says, I'm having it made right now, and he says, it'll be up there. And so I went back, and actually, you know, the little guest books they put out for Thunder Bay, they have a picture of it. And it's up there with the pool table and that. Was in there. Yeah, I got the book here. But yeah, so that's where the Campana is, and it's up in there. But it was funny. So then, when I'm leaving, I thought, well, I hate to stir things up. So I said to him, I said, you guys ought to do your homework. I said before you publish stuff, I said. He says, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I just finished telling you. I said, I've been away from Port Arthur for 50 years. And I said, I turn on the TV, and every now and then you put these little vintage shots on. And I said, you got a vintage shot there. I said, it says the Princess Hotel was built by Mr. Filipovic to look after the lumberjacks, or during the lumberjack age in the 50s and the 60s when they come to town. I said, well, you got part of it right. And he looked at me. I said, the Princess Hotel happened to be my grandfather's grocery store, and he sold it to Filipovic, and Filipovic turned it into the Princess Hotel because it had 8 rooms above it, and he got a license for downstairs. And I said, I'm not just saying this. I said, I was with my grandfather when he made the deal with Filipovic, because my grandfather used to haul me all over the place. You know what the next thing was? He said, I couldn't believe it. He says, where's your grandfather's store? I said, torn down now. I says, it used to be 36 Cumberland Street, and I says, it's right across from where they built the new fire hall. And I said, it used to be right on the corner of Ambrose Street and Cumberland. He never said another word. One thing, as I told him, and I said, look, I said, I got a fantastic memory. I said, but don't ask me what I had for supper 2 nights ago. But the old days, it's funny, the old days I can remember everything. I can remember everything. Sitting on top of a pulpwood stick out here on a sawhorse was my grandfather was cutting it. And then he taught me on the end of the buck saw. Yeah.
Well, I sure appreciate you.
And it's, one thing, and it can go on, I don't care because I let it be known. Coming out of the bush and the stuff around here, like I brought a lot of the old stuff with me. Like I had sweet saws. I had the old original sweet saw that was made with the wooden frame. I had broad axes, grub hose, picks. I had the peeling spuds for peeling logs. The blade knife for making the first swipe right from one end of the log down to the other. When they first come out with the chains, but the Swede saw blades, and the old Swedes taught me, I could file a Swede saw blade just like you had the raker, you could set the rakers for the rakers and the blade, and how you file it. I had all that stored stuff in my shed, see. Never paid too much attention to it until you go to look for something. I know there's a few things missing. Couldn't figure it out. I thought, well, maybe I misplaced them. Automatically think that. This went on for about 3-4 years until I noticed everything was gone. Pulp hooks, everything what the timber industry, eh? And the thing was locked up. How in the hell are they stealing this stuff? There was a group in down. This just got out in the last year or that? There's a group of them was in late year, in the end of October, when a bunch of the guys here and the campers, they were down in Fesnick's backyard having a beer, and I walked by and went in. They said, "Come on in." And they got talking about something, and I said, "Yeah," I said, "you wouldn't believe the amount of stuff that was stolen out of my yard." "How in the hell do you know it was stolen?" I said, "It's very simple, because one year they made a mistake." They said, "What's that?" I said, "They were picking the lock, and the pick broke in 2 of the locks, and they couldn't get in. And when I come out, I had to cut the locks off to get into it." And I says, that's how they were stealing this stuff. They were picking the locks. And I got a list of everything that was stolen. Because I'll lay you 10 to 1 right now, Tom. All that stuff is hanging in some restaurants.
Oh.
Because that's what all the pups, the ice tongs for 25-pound blocks of ice tongs for 150-pound blocks. I had all of them, all that stuff. It's all gone.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And you don't know who did it.
Yeah.
But I know that when I used to be out here late in the fall, right up until, well, remember the year they stole our generators?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was myself and Peter Dennison that got that. Like, I'd be in my shed, and in the late fall, you wouldn't believe the number of half-ton trucks used to drive by here every now and then. I had a list there, and every time I'd see a truck, I put the license plate down.
Right.
And I used to walk down the avenue, every day, and check the houses. Like, and one year, I went up behind Gord Stinson's place, and the yellow place, his annex.
Right.
The back door was open. And Mike was with me. I said, "Holy crap, somebody's here, maybe." So we took our time. We went in very gently and went upstairs and checked the whole place. And there was nobody there. Nothing seemed to be disturbed or anything. So we locked the door. They had the inside locks, the flip lock.
Right.
So we locked it and closed it up. And when I got back, I phoned Gord. Oh, he says, "Thank you." He says, "I was in there and I was supposed to go." And he says, "I guess the wind blew it." But when they got the generators, and I was checking all the places, and I got down to Peary's place,
Yeah.
and that's the first one I noticed. It was gone. I kept walking along the bridge, and his name, where Hearn is now. He bought right in front of McEwen's, down where the road is there on the right hand side. Cavaners. I knew him. He was with the ministry, and he got transferred. He was down in Chapleau, and I think that's why he sold it. But he had a brand new generator because he bought it was exactly the same as the one I had, and he was asking me if there was any way you could quieten it. And his shed was wide open, and I looked in it, and the generator was gone. And I hadn't gone any more than, I guess I was maybe in front of Sharon's. And Peter Dennis was walking with, and they got climies. So I told Peter, we got who did we get a hold of? Got a hold of some, I think maybe it was Cam, to phone the OPP.
Right.
And you wouldn't believe this. He says, well, the constable on the other end says, well, we only got one constable that handles everything on theft from here to Nipigon. The stuff is stolen, it's gone now, but we'll be out to interview you. I think it was 5 days later, this lady, OPP, come out, sat down at my kitchen table. I explained to her exactly how I did. I said, it poured day they're in town, day I went to town, and they just pulled a generator in here and threw a blanket over it. They never touched the house, but they went out and they cut the locks in my shed, looking for it in there. And I just brought in a 5-gallon can of gas. The only thing was they stole like 5 gallons of gas and I had a pair of heavy metal cutters. And they took the metal cutters. That's the only two things they stole from me. So she says, well, we'll go and check, and they checked, got the numbers. But you heard how they got that guy, yeah? Well, where they ended up. Did you ever know that?
No.
Remember when that ruckus in Pass Lake, where the guy was shot?
Yeah.
The guy that he was chasing somebody else. Ross was his name. He was from, they say he was from Marilla. He has that house, you know, when you get on the highway and you're going down, and then you go right up that house right on that. There's a house on the top up there. That was his house. And he was shot. He was the guy that was shot, plus his partner with him. And when the police went there, they got all the records of all the stuff that was stolen. He was the guy that was doing it. He didn't only steal from Silver Islet, he stole from Loon Lake, he stole from El Dorado Beach all along there. They got everything. They got receipts of stuff that he'd sold, where he sold the stolen stuff. Yeah, they got it all. There hasn't been a thing.
Missing since.
Yeah, from anywhere on any of the beaches. That's where it all was, right on the top of the hill there.